Hi there everyone. In this video we're going to continue our series on modern philosophy and the nature of the human mind by looking at some worries with Ameau's thesis about the so-called impassivity of the human mind. In the video we're going to start just by reviewing what Ameau's view here is. Then we'll talk about what I'm going to call the phenomenological puzzle that arises for his view. Then we'll talk about an epistemological problem that I'm going to call the problem of epistemic isolation. So epistemological here just means relating to knowledge. So this is a problem relating to knowledge. And then I'm going to close with some worries that might arise when we think about Descartes' project and the foundation he was trying to provide for the physical sciences. So first, let's consider Ameau's central ideas. So his views about the so-called impassivity, not being passive, of the human mind is captured by his three theses. First, he says human minds do not experience any sensations. Now, the fundamental idea here seems to be because the human mind is a spirit, and spirits are purely active substances. In order to experience sensations, they'd have to be passive and be influenced by material objects outside of them. And we saw lots of arguments for this thesis in our previous video, but the central idea behind a lot of those arguments seems to be this claim that human minds are to be understood as immaterial spirits, and spirits, by definition, on Ameau's view, are purely active substances. But if something experiences sensations, well, that implies that it is being influenced by some material object outside of itself. And insofar as something is being influenced by an object outside of itself, it is thereby being passive. All right. It is not the source of its own actions or activity, so to speak. And so, the idea of it having sensations would contradict the idea that a human mind is a purely active substance in the form of a spirit. Similarly, human minds do not have any faculty of sensation. They do not have the power to be influenced by the material objects in this way to produce these sensations. But of course, Ameau still believes that human beings have a faculty of sensation, and we have sensations. We have visual sensations, we have auditory sensations, we have olfactory sensations, we have tactile sensations, etc. And so, since these are not placed in the mind for Ameau, these are in the body. Now, to understand this first problem that we're going to raise for Ameau's view, is we need to take into account this idea that contemporary philosophy of mind often distinguishes between two aspects of the human mind. On the one hand, the human mind seems to have what philosophers call intentionality. This is the ability of the mind or mental states to have meaning or to represent or think about things outside themselves. We talked about this in relation to Descartes and this idea of objective reality and formal reality and the object of our thoughts. The idea here is just that when I have a belief that I broke my leg skiing when I was 3 years old, my belief is about my 3-year-old self. When I believe that my kids are in the other room eating, my belief is about, it represents my kids. So that's the sense in which my beliefs have intentionality. They represent or they have a meaning about something else. But philosophers distinguish this from what you might call the mind having consciousness, or philosophers commonly refer to this as phenomenal consciousness specifically. And the idea here seems to be that there's certain mental states that when we're in them, they have a certain subjective qualitative feature to them. And this is often captured by the idea that there's often something it's like to be in a particular mental state. For instance, there's something it's like to be in the state of pain. And what it's like to be in pain is very different than what it's like to be smelling roses. And what it's like to be smelling roses is very different than what it's like to see red. And what's like to see red is very different than what it's like to see green. That subjective character of what it sort of feels like from the inside, so to speak. That's this aspect of phenomenal consciousness. When you have those mental states and there's something it's like to be in that mental state, we say that it has phenomenal consciousness. Now, this allows me to explain what we might call the phenomenological puzzle. So if sensations belong solely to the body, then it isn't clear that Ameau can explain why sensations have a particular subjective character or experience. So why, when I'm in pain, why does it feel like something to be in pain? And why does what it feel like to be in pain feel different than maybe what it's like to see someone else in pain? So compare two cases here. Imagine I'm kicked in the shin, or imagine that you're kicked in the shin, versus I see you get kicked in the shin, or you see someone else get kicked in the shin. Now, in each case, notice there is physical damage to a body, and our bodily organs will react in various ways, and as a result, in each case, I will have thoughts about that body being damaged. So when I'm kicked in the shin, I'll think, oh, my shin is hurt. When I see you get kicked in the shin, I'll have the thought that your body has been damaged. However, I only feel or have an experience with a certain subjective character, the sort of painfulness of pain, when it's me that gets kicked in the shin. When you get kicked in the shin, I don't feel your pain, but I do feel my pain. But notice, this suggests that the feeling is something different than either the mere bodily sensation in a Mo's sense of the term and the thought about that pain. Because when I see you get kicked in the shin, there's still the bodily damage to your body. There's the bodily sensation. And there's me having a thought that there's a bodily sensation, that there's this damage in your body. But that doesn't give rise to the feeling of your pain. So in my case, I have that bodily damage, just like you do. I have the bodily sensation. I have the thought that I'm in pain, but I have this extra thing. I have this feeling. That seems to suggest that this feeling arises because my mind is sort of attached to my body. It's united with my body. And because it's united with my body, when my body has this bodily sensation, my mind also feels that sensation as well. It doesn't just think about that sensation. As Descartes would say, my mind is suffering with my body. As opposed to when you get kicked in the shin, your body suffers, and I can see that and think about it with my mind, but my mind doesn't suffer with your body, and that's why I don't feel the pain. Because my mind isn't united with your body, that bodily sensation doesn't give rise to a sensation in my mind like it does when I get kicked in the shin. Now, I do want to suggest that there might be a solution that a Mo could try to use to solve this problem. And perhaps he could do this by appealing to this idea of attention. So maybe this subjective character of an experience can be explained by the mind actively attending to a bodily sensation. So you could say the sensation is still always in the body, it's never in the mind, but the subjective character arises when the mind actively attends to that particular bodily sensation. Let me give an example to motivate this. Imagine you're playing a soccer game and you take a big fall and you twist your ankle and you start feeling some really bad pain. But then you decide to try to power through. And you start playing the game and you get distracted, so while you're playing the game, you no longer feel this sensation of pain, so to speak. But then when the game gets done and you're no longer distracted, you then start to feel that pain again. You feel that damage to your body again. The idea is, you might say, during the game, you didn't have that subjective character because you weren't attending to the pain. Your attention was focused elsewhere. But then, after the game, because you were no longer distracted by what you were doing, your attention then returned to this damage in your body, and you were thereby aware of the pain by attending to it and had that subjective experience. So on this kind of idea, I get kicked in the shin, which causes a bodily sensation of pain in a Mo's sense. There's just this bodily reaction. I don't have any sensation of pain in my mind, though. However, my mind thinks about the pain by actively attending to that sensation in my body. And that active attention is what accounts for the subjective character that I feel when my body is in pain. On the other hand, since my mind is not conjoined with your body, I cannot actively attend to your bodily sensation of pain when you're kicked in the shin, so I won't have that subjective character. In this way, the sensation is never in the mind, but we can still account for the subjective difference between my thinking about my pain sensation in my body and my thinking about your pain sensation in your body. My thinking about my pain sensation is direct insofar as I can attend to that bodily sensation itself, but my thinking about your pain sensation is indirect insofar as I have to attend to and think about the visual sensations and auditory sensations in my own body that see you getting kicked and hear you yelling ouch. But there's another problem here that we're going to call the problem of epistemic isolation. So epistemic here just means relating to knowledge, and isolation just means to be separated from. So the worry here is just that on a Mo's view, my body cannot influence or cause anything that happens in my mind. Now this makes it seem like my thoughts, my beliefs, are sort of screened off from both my body and the physical world. Because the physical world can't get into my mind, because insofar as it could get into my mind and influence my mind, my mind would thereby be passive. And so it looks like my mind is just cut off from the physical world. None of that physical world can get in. This means that when I believe that I'm in pain, it seems that Amo's view implies that I don't believe this because I'm in pain. So it's not the pain itself that causes me to believe that I'm in pain. Because remember, the belief is my thought in my mind, and the pain is a sensation in my body. But the belief can't be influenced by anything in the body because that would imply that my mind is being passive. So if this is true, though, if I don't believe I'm in pain because I'm in pain, well, why should my belief count as knowledge rather than just an arbitrary belief? If my belief has no connection to anything that makes it true, it seems like it's nothing more than just a lucky guess. Similarly, on Amo's view, I might have a visual sensation of a desk in front of me, where that sensation exists in my body, and I might have a belief that there's a desk in front of me, where that belief exists in my mind, but my belief that there's a desk in front of me cannot be caused by the visual sensation I have, since that would contradict his idea that the mind is a purely active substance on Amo's view. But if my belief that there's a desk in front of me can't be caused by my visual sensation, well then why should we think that my belief counts as knowledge, since it's not reacting to what I'm sensing? And this is especially worrisome since Amo seems to reject Descartes' rationalist picture of knowledge, where our knowledge comes from our reason, but he seems to accept an empiricist idea where the ideas we have in our minds and the knowledge we get have to first come from sensation or experience. But if sensation is in the body and can't influence the mind, can't cause things to happen in the mind, well, how could sensation create ideas or beliefs or knowledge? So this is a puzzle for Amo insofar as he seems to have cut off the mind from any influence from the body. Now, there's another issue I want to raise here that's more specific to the kinds of worries that this would raise for Descartes. So consider this picture again of trying to study the outside world of like the sun and flowers and rocks, etc. We often think that the sun has light that hits the surface of a flower. That flower's surface then reflects that light, which hits our eyes. And then in our mind, we have a certain sensation. We experience the color of redness. And we think to ourselves, I see red, or that rose is red. So this doesn't actually match how Descartes thinks the picture of the relationship between mind and body works here, because according to Descartes, a lot of these features aren't actually present in the world. So for instance, all that subjective character, like the color of the flower and even the color of the sun, these are not actually out there in the physical world. The colors we experience in our mind are not actually in the objects we see. The objects we see are, in a sense, colorless. The flower has certain reflectance properties. The sun's light has certain wavelengths. And as a matter of fact, the properties of the surface of the flower is able to reflect certain wavelengths of light, and then that hits our eyes. But then that gives rise to the experience of redness. The actual qualitative experience of redness, that exists in our mind, not in the flower itself. And the reason Descartes thought this was partly because the physical sciences must describe physical objects in terms that can be quantified and measured. He thought this was the new method of science that Copernicus and Galileo had been bringing forward and had so much success with. It's because they were using mathematics to give formulas that actually quantified the behavior of physical objects and the nature of physical objects that they were able to make such progress in these natural physical sciences. So features such as size, shape, position, mass, speed, direction, all of these can be measured and quantified using mathematics. However, qualitative features can't be quantified and measured. And so these aspects of physical objects would be able to be studied by this new mechanical mathematical method for doing science. So consider the example of color. We can quantify and measure the wavelengths of light that travel through the air. We can also quantify and measure the surface properties of a flower petal, including the wavelengths of light that it might absorb and the wavelengths of light that it might reflect because of those surface properties. But we cannot quantify this subjective character that we experience, this redness we experience when we look at the flower. We can't measure that, we can't quantify that. And we can say similar things about the case of heat. So when we go to the fire, we might feel heat. But that feeling of heat isn't something we can measure and quantify. We can measure the temperature of the fire. We can measure the mean kinetic energy, how fast on average the particles are moving in the fire, and we can ask how that makes changes to the surfaces of our hand. That's all stuff that we can measure, but we can't actually measure the feeling of heat that we experience as a result. So Descartes thought that if the physical sciences use these mathematical, mechanical methods to reveal the true nature of objects, what are we supposed to do with all these qualitative, these non-quantitative features that we seem to experience? Well, Descartes' solution was to say that those qualitative features, they don't exist in the physical objects, they exist in the mind. So there's all these quantitative features of physical objects that we can study with the sciences to understand their true nature. And these quantitative features have the power to produce these sensations in our mind. But the redness is not out there in the world, it's in our mind. And so we can still use this physical science to understand everything about the physical world on Descartes' view. But for Rameau, if he puts the sensations out of the mind and back into the body, part of this physical world, well, now we have these qualitative features that cannot be quantified. And so how can we come to understand what the true nature of physical objects actually is? So that's another worry that at least Descartes might have with Rameau's view of trying to put sensations into the physical body as opposed to the mind. All right, so that's all for this video. See you all next time. Bye-bye.